in different directions and different velocities, the density of the air that you have to travel through, the humidity in the air. There are a lot of variables within the air itself that can cause that to vary. And the construction of the bomb. If they, in process of loading, happen to nick one of the fins, for instance, plus the air of the bombardier himself.
Lack of accuracy meant that even when civilians weren't targeted, they were often the victims of strategic bombing. Each pilot dealt with a moral dilemma in his own way.
It was a strictly impersonal sort of thing. As far as I was concerned, they told us what to bomb, and we did our best to bomb it. Now, the fallout, which may have been civilian casualties, at 23,000 feet, you are aware that you perhaps drop bombs on women and children, which probably we did, not deliberately, but inadvertently. I really have no guilt about that. The alternative was Hitler ruling the world.
In the final stages of the war, American factories produced a staggering amount of planes and bombs. Only a great industrial power like the United States could sustain a long campaign of strategic bombing. In 1944, the US and Britain produced 44,000 planes to Germany's 2,000. This was a war of attrition, with the Allies trying to batter the enemy into submission with sheer numbers of machines and men. After the invasion of France in June 1944, the Allied effort was firmly focused on the ground war. This was how the conflict in Europe would end, battle by battle, mile by mile, until the German army collapsed. As strategic bombing was overshadowed by the infantry's advance, critics began to ask whether it had really fulfilled its promise.
Well, it depends on what you expected of bombing at the outset. If you expected it to contribute to victory in Europe, you certainly have to be happy with the results. One of the important campaigns in the later part of World War II was the campaign against transportation and communications targets. It makes it very difficult, and towards the end almost impossible, for the German army to prosecute its campaign on the ground. German supplies are so interrupted, their ability to move men around the theater has become so restricted that it really has a very important impact on the ultimate outcome of the war. If you expected bombing to win the war on its own, then naturally you're going to be disappointed.
Our Superfort raids on Japan are swiftly being intensified as more and more of the B-29s roll from the assembly lines.
If bombing's effectiveness had increased in Europe, it seemed to make a quantum leap in the war with Japan. The US used the new B-29 bomber to carry out a series of attacks on major population centers. This was area bombing at its most ferocious. The goal was to wreak as much destruction as possible, as quickly as possible, to bring Japan to its knees. In March 1945, an incendiary raid engulfed 16 square miles of Tokyo in flames. 80,000 people lay dead. 1 million were left homeless. But morale held. Japan rejected all calls for surrender. It would take the most stunning escalation in the history of bombing to make the government change its mind. On August 6th, a B-29 called Enola Gay headed toward the city of Hiroshima. Cradled in its bomb bay was the embodiment of Dewey's theory of frightfulness, the atomic bomb.
When we came in and dropped the weapon and made the turn, I did it as fast as possible, and I didn't much more than get the airplane around and the wings level, and I said, oh boy, it's over with, and here we are almost 50 seconds away. The bomb didn't explode before it was supposed to, and so forth and so on, so everything's normal. I didn't much more than get that thought out of my mouth, then all of a sudden, looking forward and a little bit up through all of this glass here in the front, the sky in front of me lit up to the most brilliant blue hue you've ever imagined in your life.
80,000 people were killed. Again, Japan was asked to surrender. Again, it refused.
A short time ago, an American airplane dropped one bomb on Hiroshima and destroyed its usefulness to the enemy. That bomb has more power than 20,000 tons of TNT. The Japanese began the war from the air at Pearl Harbor. They have been repaid many-fold, and the end is not yet. If they do not now accept our terms, they may expect a rain of ruin from the air, the like of which has never been seen on this earth.
3 days after the Hiroshima blast, a second bomb was dropped on Nagasaki. 40,000 more people died. The following day, the Japanese sued for peace. Here, finally, was bombing that could win a war. At the dawn of the nuclear age, the world woke up to a terrible new reality. In an air raid lasting only a few minutes, this could just as easily be London or Paris or even Washington. The head of the U.S. Air Force, General Carl Spaatz, quickly began to plan for the future.
We must maintain an adequate, well-trained, fully equipped Air Force of the kind necessary to use these new weapons quickly and effectively. During World War II, America's air potential came of age. That process of growth took time, but we must now realize that never again will we have time for such expansion.
Almost as soon as the hot war was over, the Cold War began. Boeing built hundreds of long-range B-50 bombers that could carry atomic weapons all the way to a new enemy, the Soviet Union, which was building its own nuclear arsenal.
Today, science is providing us with more devastating explosives and with intercontinental bombers capable of carrying them direct to the enemy nations from existing American bases.
But in Korea, the world learned an important lesson about the nuclear age. Because no one dared to use atomic weapons, wars would still be fought on the ground with conventional arms. And they would still be long and bitter. Bombing would still be carried out with conventional bombs. It would often be inaccurate and would stiffen, not weaken, the enemy's will to fight. But that wasn't the worst of it from the Air Force's perspective.
The air commanders had not anticipated the type of restrictions that were going to exist in the Korean War. Virtually all were combat veterans of World War II, in which they had just fought a war for unconditional surrender. Korea was really a very limited struggle in which our means of applying weaponry was limited and confined because we did not want the war to evolve into a general nuclear war against the Soviet Union. We could not attack targets within 12 miles of the Soviet border, the part of the Soviet Union that touched North Korea. That was off limits as well. And then we had other prohibitions on attacking. For instance, there was one massive hydroelectric facility near the Chinese border that was off limits, that we could not attack.